Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Butler. I've worked with the Association of BellTel Retirees since February of 1997. So today being part of the event, today being its annual meeting. I was at their first annual meeting on Long Island. 500 people in the room. 500 people. And what we saw then was that there was a need. There was an absolute need for the advocacy that all of you have continued and carried on. And ironically, the following year, 1998, they gave me all types of hell for not showing up at the annual meeting, but I got married the Saturday before. So that meeting was in Boston at University of Massachusetts, and it took me a couple of years to overcome that one. So the last panel was so great. We've held over John and we've held over Carol. Thanks for participating. Also, we have Tom Steed, the chairman of the Association of BellTel Retirees. Besides also representing and working with the Association of BellTel Retirees for 22 and a half years, I was also spokesman for the FDNY's Firefighters Union. And so as a result, I was exposed to hearing and seeing and learning about many issues about toxicity, exposure, contamination. So you think about 9/11. President Biden, in his 2022 State of the Union address, focused heavily on burn pits and how they impacted the members of our United States military, the toxicity, the diseases that it brought back. And in fact, he's a strong believer that one of his sons perished from that toxicity that he got while being in the military. What was 9/11? But 9/11 was really the largest burn pit, open burn pit known on at least our country. And think about going back about 8 or 9 years ago. I remember we were doing an interview with one of the Verizon retirees. She had worked at NYNEX, New York Telephone, Verizon, and she said every single day her teams would muster. They would muster and gather to do their daily work at the base of the World Trade Center site. And so she said it was their team because they knew where the lines were, they knew where the cables were, they knew where the vaults were, that they were called upon to immediately do the work. And they had to restore communications for national security, for our financial markets, because Wall Street is the epicenter of it all. So they were down there for the 100 days that everything in those towers was burning. It was 100 days they were burning. There was all types of toxins in there. There was asbestos, you name it, lead. It was all down there, and it was all burning. And when Christy Todd Whitman ran the Environmental Protection Agency, her statement was, the air is safe to breathe. The water is safe to drink. Well, we know now that that's not true. We know that there was absolutely a lie. And maybe it was the best of intentions to try to get people back to work, to try to reopen our financial markets. But the canaries in the coal mine were something that was used hundreds of years ago. 100 years ago. Who were the canaries in the coal mine? They were the frontline workers. And those were the people who worked for Con Edison Corporation. They were the people who worked for the New York Telephone Company. They were the people who were at AT&T and other major companies, the construction people. And what's the recourse? Well, with 9/11, there's a fund, a federal fund that people can qualify. And about a year ago, Tommy started to really dig down into this and say, you know, we have OSHA rights and OSHA protections, and we have to start talking about it. We have to start bringing that more to the surface, because it's not just about pensions. It's not just about our benefits. It's about what rights do we have? Were we given the safety gear and protections? Were we given the right warnings? So that's why we have a great group with Tommy, with John, and with Carol. Carol, I'd like to start with you by throwing it open to you. And you've kind of heard that before. The air is safe to breathe and the water is safe to drink. You grew up in a DuPont company town and came from a DuPont company family.
That's right. I really was concerned about when I used to go to Parkersburg, West Virginia, about the plant. And I can't say that I saw anything that was happening, but I did have on many occasions a routine tour when I was in IT of Chambers Works in New Jersey, which did reclamation from companies all over the country to get rid of bad chemicals and safely dispose of them. And of course, there's a lot of rivers there. My mother grew up in Newcastle, Delaware, which is right on the Delaware River next to New Jersey, and Chambers Works. My mother had cancer. I can't say it was caused by that, but I know that many people are affected by what companies do, and it's not ethical, and it hurts even more when they do things that they don't take care of the employees, even after knowingly affecting their health.
Carol, you talked to us about one time when you worked for the company. You and a team of about 50 people worked in what was called an annex, an office area that was called an annex. And you explained that each and every day there was black soot each morning on everyone's desk, and you'd all have to clean it off.
Right.
And so after X number of months or half a year, they moved you and explained it was simply mold. The whole team was mold. But I think it was at age 34 or 35, you wound up with a heart valve problem, which is very unnatural for someone with no family history, I believe, of it.
Right.
And your colleagues all had permanent asthma, regular nosebleeds, and you said you lost your sense of smell.
Right.
Can you talk about the situation and how the company reacted?
Yeah, we were all moved to this. I didn't even know the building or notice. It was in the DuPont, not the DuPont building, but the Nemours building, which is a big building across from DuPont in Wilmington. And it was on the ground level. And they had made this section called an annex into an office complex. And later on, we all found out, because we never even noticed it, it was formerly a garage. And we were just told all of a sudden, after months, I know we were in there a year or 2 years of this stuff. And I don't know, other people could have had a heart valve issue or a heart issue. I just know what I ended up with. And I also had bad allergies. So I assumed the allergies, as many people had them, and asthma were the cause of this mold. I never associated the heart valve thing with mold. And I just happened, in talking to you, looked up the other day, and it said it can cause heart valve issues. And of course, I had heart valve repair last year, surgery. But the main thing is that we were all told, we're moving to a building down in Newark, Delaware, which is a much longer drive for me for work every day, till they got another place for us to go. And all they did was say, okay, and if you need any medicine for your allergies, we'll pay for it. And that was it.
And they've taken away a lot of the benefits medical benefits that would have protected you
Yep.
in the merger so DuPont merged with Dow and then split into three companies, Dow, DuPont, and Corteva, as Ed Stone was just talking about. Michigan Radio, Michigan, I think, National Public Radio just did a major spotlight story on Dow, that Dow produced over 600 million pounds of toxic chemical waste. And this is just that one story. And that they paid a $2.5 million fine to the government for violating the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. So that seems rather measly, but what about the workers? What about the frontline people like yourself?
I mean, I feel very lucky. I mean, all these people, I've heard their stories about working in plants and unsafe environments that had terrible things happen to them, and some are not here anymore. And it just bothers me so much, because I remember DuPont had a safety department that sold their expertise in industrial safety. And yet here they are doing the opposite in their own plants. Yeah.
John, switching over to you, there's a commercial I remember for years. It's a motto, a logo. If you work in the marketing department, you desperately want people to remember, repeat your logo or know your motto. GE, we bring good things to life.
Yeah, not a chemical plant.
So you...
Better things for better living.
Medicines for better living, right? That was yours, Carol, right? So,
I'm sorry.
John, you were talking about that you and your colleagues over a 40 or 30-year career were exposed to countless toxins and chemicals even before EPA and OSHA really came into effect. You worked for decades at a General Electric plant in Waterford, New York. You want to talk about the experiences you've had there?
Sure. I started at GE in 1969, then we went on strike for 3 months, and I went back in 71. So that's the 71 to now is the 42 year, well, till I retired in 2013 is the 42 years. It was a chemical plant. It's very easy to tell you. There was many different chemicals that were carcinogens, non-polar solvents and polar solvents, and I'm going to give you some examples. TCE, which you've heard of TCE, maybe you didn't know this, but was used in dry cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
But we used to use it to clean the floors in the control rooms, the equipment, to clean out vessels, all kinds of stuff, and we weren't using PPE when we were doing that stuff. I gave the extreme example of guys washing their work boots. They had silicone rubber on them, try to get the rubber off them. And some of these people, well, I won't say a lot, but a number of them put their feet in the bucket of TCE with their feet in the shoe. I said, oh my God. Another building had vinyl chlorides. Vinyl chlorides, that building, it was called Building 21. It was called the Black Hole. And the reason it was called the Black Hole, because people, they used to joke, people went in there and never came out because the vinyl chlorides killed them. You know, there were so many deaths from vinyl chlorides in that plant, and they eventually OSHA shut it down once OSHA got involved. We had benzene, toluene, and then the asbestos. Our ceiling tiles were asbestos. The floor tiles were asbestos. The piping insulation was asbestos. We used to go out and on the piping, if there was a leak in the pipe, we'd cut off all the asbestos insulation. And here we are breathing in all that dust and all that stuff. Until again, OSHA banned the asbestos, and they also encapsulated the pipes and did all that kind of stuff, which we had a pre-meeting the other day, and Tommy shared some of that stuff too, Tommy Steed. So if you do a little calculation, if we started in 1947, those people, if they're still alive, are well in their 90s. They have low pensions. They're probably suffering from a lot of this stuff pre-OSHA, pre-ENCON. ENCON is New York State Environmental Conservation, and EPA stipulations and regulations, where they put PPE in there, your protective equipment, respirators, face shields, tie-back suits, proper gloves, all that kind of stuff. All like we were discussing the other day, when did all this start to happen? Well, OSHA began to monitor our plant in the 1970s, in that early 1970s. And then their MSDS data sheets, only with all the PPE requirements and standards, didn't come out until like 1983. So you see, from 47, when the plant started to 83, you can imagine what all the employees were exposed to. And then with asbestos, a lot of people got asbestosis. We had a lawsuit. We were involved in a lawsuit. A lot of people got settlements. When I got involved, the settlements were down to nothing. I have a mild case of asbestosis. The final regulations to regulate that, there was pre-standards to this in the late 70s. But the final standards were 1994 to 1995. And as I told you before, also EPA and ENCON, New York State ENCON, their regulations and standards became much more stringent. So, but those older retirees, the ones that are still alive and even the ones just after them, like my age, were exposed to all that stuff. I used to jokingly say that plant makes Love Canal look like a picnic because they dig up the ground, solvent come out of the ground. This stuff was all over the place. It was just, and then they turn around, GE turns around, and this is a chemical plant. And we were guaranteed our retiree benefits, healthcare being the first one that GE took away and put us into a brokered healthcare system. With $1,000 a year, they supplemented us. Only 60% of our retirees employees there got that 60%, 40%, because GE made up all these stipulations, didn't even qualify to get that RRA, retiree reimbursement account, $1,000 a year. Can you imagine? When I used to do benefits, the benefit plan was about $8,000 an employee. When I left in 2013, it was about $20,000. But that self-insured plan went bye-bye for us. So these people had a lot of out-of-pocket expense. I'm not saying everything was caused by chemicals, but you know, age and everything else factors in. But a lot of these people, they gave their lives to that plant, and then they take away that health care. It's amazing to me.
That's horrible, John. Tommy, I want to turn it over to you. You talked earlier about a building in Manhattan where there was a major toxic fire. I think that's determined to be one of the largest indoor toxic fires. It happened in 1975, and you were on the team, that helped restore service, but I think you spent 5 months, nearly 5 months in a manhole.
Yeah. When our boss came out to our job and said, all right, shut everything down, meet me at 13th Street and 2nd Avenue, I said, well, boss, we never worked in Manhattan before from the Bronx. He said, you are now. Building's on fire. We got down there, smoke was coming out of the windows, firefighters were attacking with, ladder trucks. So I said to my boss, I said, well, you told me to hurry up and get down here. What do you want me to hurry up and do now? Rather sarcastically, he said, well, let's wait for the firemen to put out the fire. And it burnt into the next morning, okay, before they had it fully extinguished and under control. So everybody from here to California that had a craft trade or profession or expertise in rebuilding a now totally gutted building, because everything was blowtorched, cut, dumped out the window into 40-foot containers, hauled away. Everything was brought in brand new, mounted. So it was a massive effort. I mean, thousands of miles of cable were cut out of the cable vault and removed. The cable vault was black. It was completely black. It was everything burnt except the actual copper. Okay, everything. The copper didn't burn. It kind of molded all together like spaghetti stuck together, but the metal didn't burn. And we cut and gut, we removed everything to make way for the new cable. At the same time, our subsidy, Empire City Subway, jackhammered the sidewalk from the building foundation to the curb and dug a ditch, which I'm going to say about 30 feet wide and at least 25 feet deep, to expose the duct banks entering underneath the foundation so we could pull out the now obsolete cable and pull in the new cables. So the building smells so toxic. I mean, PCBs it was just, it was in your nostrils. I mean,
And that was from the melting plastics.
yeah, when you left at the end of the day, I would blow my nose and 2 rivulets of black would come out into my handkerchief. I mean, that's how thick the soot and everything was in the building. So, I mean, thousands of, like I said, telephone employees worked on the restoration. And you know, the funny thing is, things like cancer, they have a latency time. You don't develop it tomorrow. You may not develop it for 5 or 10 years. But if it's set in, you know, the latency is going to expire and you're going to get ill. And a lot of people did get ill. A lot of people died prematurely. I mean, when I say you die in your 40s, that's premature. 50s, that's premature, you know. Leave a widow and orphans, it's sad, you know.
And I
Yeah.
think, Tommy, I think John mentioned that all those cable lines were more than likely manufactured up at the GE plant up at Fort Edward. So everything connects here.
Yeah, you know, and a funny thing, the fire department did their job. They put the fire out. The employees did their job for, you know, over a half a year rebuilding the building. The corporate lawyers and the municipal lawyers did their job by ignoring our exposure. Don't say anything, let it go away, there'll be no liability. And that's really the crime here. They knew, but they were indemnifying themselves. They didn't protect the employees, the good employees that did all this restoration, you know, working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'll never forget, 42 days, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I had to drive home to the Bronx, an hour each way. So that's 14 hours a day. I was home for 10 hours. Shower, eat, sleep, get up and go back, do it again. Now, and after 42 days, they gave me a day off. One day off. The thing with toxic chemicals, hazards in our workplace, they come in 3 forms: solid, liquid, and vapor, gas. So a lot of times we don't see it, we don't smell it, we don't even know it's there.
Right.
You know, we're being poisoned and we don't even have a clue. And it wasn't, like you said, John, until November 1983, where they mandated the material safety data sheets to identify chemicals in the workplace, so employees knew to protect themselves and what they'd be exposed for. But, you know, hey, that was 12 years after I started, almost 13 years after I started, so.
Tommy, what kind of, did you have respirators down the manhole?
No,
Did you have Tyvek suits?
No.
Or anything
No.
equivalent?
we had rubber manhole boots. We had boots to keep our feet dry.
Made by John Phelps, made by GE, because I think GE made the boots that landed on the moon, they advertised?
They did, but that's a different kind of rubber, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tom Steed, let me ask you this question. What's your reaction when I utter the following phrase? The miracle on 2nd Avenue. What does that mean to you and the rest of the workforce?
Well, it really was the disaster on 7th Avenue, you know, because the fire should have never started in the first place. But a lot of my fellow workers, like I said, died prematurely. And I know they worked at that job. They worked with me at that job. And I to this day, I wonder, was it from their exposure? You know, did they die prematurely out of natural, just developing cancer naturally, or did they bring it home with them, you know? So, Yeah, I mean, the company said the Miracle on Second Avenue, they were very proud of the restoration. But don't forget, there was one national telephone company at that time, American Telephone and Telegraph. We owned every foot of cable, every telephone pole in America. We owned all the equipment, all the telecom equipment in America. And better than that, we had the authority to commandeer it and send it to New York for the rebuilding. That's really the logistics of that whole job was really the miracle. People far away as Colorado sending their stopping what they were doing and sending unselfishly sending their equipment to New York so we could rebuild. That was really the miracle. The people, were the miracle.
Tom, you played a role at one point in time doing some advocacy work for the union. And you shared the story about, and we had several people, a team of people here from IBM who worked at IBM today. And you talked about having to go in to service some facilities at IBM
Yeah.
to restore telephone
The clean
service.
room.
And could you tell that story and how they were denied information
Right.
about what the chemicals were being used, but yet you were able to get it?
Right. IBM in the Hudson Valley, Poughkeepsie was research and development, R&D. That was the think tank. Fishkill was manufacturing. That's where they did all the manufacturing. And the clean room, the telephone terminal was on the other side of the clean room. So I had to walk through the clean room to get to the telephone terminal room. Now, all these employees were head to toe in moon suits, white moon suits, clean, right? And they asked their employer, what kind of chemicals are we working with? How about the MSDS sheets to describe the chemicals? Now, these employees were not union, all right? Some management, of course, told them, we don't have to tell you, we don't care, But when I went through there, they complained to me, and I said, I don't work for IBM. They will supply me with the material safety data sheets, or their phones aren't going to be working because I'm not walking through their clean room and exposing myself to that. Well, sure enough, they came right up, and what I did, I took the book and I gave it to the IBM workers so they would know. But that's, they don't treat everybody fairly.
So, what we're talking here is about 4 great companies. These are what you'd call blue chip companies. As I was growing up, this is what you would invest your grandma's earnings in, these companies. But I'm going to ask all of you, and I'll start with Carol. You were working with a company that created some really, truly revolutionary products. What would be some of your closing remarks or final thoughts from the perspective of an advocate for retirees and what they saw or were exposed to, and a postscript on maybe the fairness and treatment that they're getting?
Well, it's funny when you're immersed in your work, and there were a lot of meetings about how DuPont cared about people and how we should treat other people that we work with well. And there were a lot of good things at DuPont that distracted me from looking at other things. And everybody felt we were part of a family because the DuPont family was involved. They would walk through the hallways and they would say hello to you. And so I never, ever thought that the company that I worked for would be harming any of us or anybody. And I never thought that they would not take care of us if they did. And all I can say is, as a loyal DuPont employee, I was grateful for the opportunities and the chances that I never would have had to go to Europe and meet people and do things. I would say I've learned that it's important to care about other people. And I was taught that by my mother and my family, and that's why I'm speaking out. I think we need to make sure that this doesn't happen over and over again to other people in this country. It isn't right. We're not a third world country. There should be a way to make people responsible and pay for doing wrong to employees that promise to take care of them.
John, thoughts on it?
You know, we'll stick with healthcare on this topic. Obviously, we were talking pensions and other things before, but when GE closed a lot of the manufacturing plants, appliances, lighting, plastic, silicones, a whole bunch of them. And when they were doing that, they promised that your retiree benefits, healthcare, pensions, and life insurance would stay intact. They promised. They went around to the plants. And again, we filed lawsuits. The salary people filed in 2014. We filed hourly, filed it in 2015. We lost both cases. But what's interesting is, and I always say these are earned benefits. They don't have to promise us nothing. We earn those benefits. But we appealed to the Court of Appeals, 3-judge panel. And we lost again 2-1. But what's interesting is what that one judge said, the woman judge. She says a verbal or a handshake agreement is just as valid as a written agreement. She says, and the courts, she said this, the courts need to reevaluate their position on this. It doesn't have to just be in the SPD, the manual or the contract. If it's a verbal or handshake agreement, it should be valid. That healthcare should never, especially our plant, a chemical plant, should never have been taken away. And then to insult us by putting us with a broker and giving us $1,000 a year, only 60% of us, is unconscionable. It's immoral. That's my opinion on it. It's immoral. And GE knows it. They know what they did because they didn't deny Jeff Immelt that almost ran the company into bankruptcy, his $5 million a year pension and perks and bonuses and stock options. He almost killed the company. That's what we were recovering from. So I'm sorry I'm passionate, but that's the way I feel.
John,
GE
we
has no right to
appreciate
do
your
what they did.
passion. We really appreciate your passion. Tommy, you became the chairman of the Association of BellTel Retirees last January, and you started to evolve some of the things that we're thinking about. So it's always been about pension advocacy. It's been about advocacy for the healthcare. The association has taken cases as high as the United States Supreme Court on behalf of its retirees to seek justice. Right. But you've added a new wrinkle. You've really started to introduce a new wrinkle and focus and spotlighting OSHA, because talk about that. And then you're the one who actually said to me yesterday, about the canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah. Well, we have new young people that I don't want them to experience what Carol, John, and myself went through. Okay? Since the days we started, you had the EPA come on board, you had MSDS in '83 come on board. So there are rules and regulations, federal, the law of the land right across the country. So I don't want our young people to get ill, all right? And I would only hope back in the old days that the corporations were naive. They didn't know they were harming people. It's probably not true, but I would hope morally, they had a soul, they had a heart, not to harm anybody. But going forward, we have to protect the retirees that were harmed and especially protect the current employees from getting harmed.
Thanks, Tom.
Can I add one more thing, Tom?
Go ahead, John.
On life insurance, I know we're talking health and all that, but on life insurance, here's what GE did. When they sold us, we became momentum. guess who bought us? Apollo. You heard a lot about Apollo earlier in the day in the theme. And they put in, I hate two clauses, reservational rights clause that they can amend, terminate any plan, and the other is called a successor clause. And then the successor clause, what they did in life insurance, I'm giving myself as an example. I had a $20,000 death benefit with GE, $20,000 death benefit with Momentum, the successor employer. GE and Momentum got their heads together and say, oh, no. You only get one 20,000, 15,000 from Momentum, 5,000 from GE. Can you imagine? They took $20,000 away from me.
John, maybe they, after what they exposed you to, they didn't think you were a good insurance risk.
Sure.
What I want to do is ask if there's any questions. Thank you for being with us and sitting through the day. Thank you. We have a lot of people who've been joining us today online, who've been submitting questions and comments online. That's really great. So it's not just the people in this room today. We have people joining us from all over the country. And as we know from past, these stories, these discussions are going to be seen by thousands of your fellow retirees who couldn't join us today or joined in for parts of the session. So I'll just ask if there's any questions for anyone on the panel. Joe?
One sec.
Oh, they're going to bring the microphone to you.
How you doing? My name's Joe Eicher, Pam Anderson's husband. I got a list here of 19 people that I can think of from like 32 years ago when I worked in this department who had died and didn't collect a pension or Social Security, insurance, or death benefits. They all died. Either they were single, divorced, or widowed. And the youngest I know is 36 years old. And they contributed to the Social Security and the pension all the way through, and that money went someplace. It was their deferred compensation went someplace and got stolen. We were $42 billion or $24 billion. I'm getting two different numbers here. Overfunded, and the money is gone. We're underfunded now.
Yep.
The other thing I got is I have a book here when I took Verizon to court, and they wrote me checks for their negligence right from the pension fund. I got paid from the pension fund, checks right from the pension fund for $128,000. They shouldn't have come from the pension fund. I sued them. I won in federal court. It took me 4 years. I had to settle because they said I settled after we won the case because they said we're going to appeal this to your broke or dead. I was already broke and I'm still alive. That's all I can say. Thank you very much. And I got to thank Jack Cohen. We have the memorial to Jack Cohen.
Yes.
Yeah, Jack was a good man.
Jack was a great leader of the association for some years. You know, what you're talking about is the early people who died early, who were on the front lines working with the company. When Tommy was talking about the telephone company fire in 1975, someone who never really got credit for his sacrifice is there was a young FDNY lieutenant who died 2 weeks afterwards. He was as healthy as an ox, and when they did his autopsy, the toxins had just eaten up his insides. And so, but never was that story ever told until Danny Noonan pretty much told it about a year ago. Retired firefighter Danny Noonan, who's been a great health advocate, at least for that workforce. Any questions? Yes.
Got one last one for you.
Yes.
Sorry. Are any of the panelists aware of any sort of continuing medical monitoring for any retirees that exist at either of your companies?
I'll start on that. In New York State, at least, where my plan was, it's called OEHC, I think it is, Occupational Something Health Center. And they have been doing studies since Geez, I was just looking at it the other day. I was hoping that the past president of the local at our plant would be here because he's an expert on this. And I said that to our group when we had a pre-meeting. I really don't have all the facts, but in this study, they said that they made a comment that, not a comment, a data statistic, that 36% of deaths were occupational related. So there has been some work, not a lot of work. And don't ever think that a company like GE is going to turn over the medical records, because they'll never do it because they'd be liable. So you know it isn't going to come from them. They're going to be honest about that. But there is some, that's one I can mention. I don't know, maybe the other panelists could mention some other studies.
Carol, do you know any?
No, being in the corporate town, I really don't. I wish I could say I did, but I would strongly doubt that they care enough to do that. But I haven't heard anyone say there were any people being monitored.
Now, I do not know any corporate monitoring, say, from Verizon. I do know a gentleman who retired from Verizon. He worked at 9/11, and he registered for the 9/11 Victims Fund. And he told me the government gives him a physical every year. Doesn't cost him a penny, but he's the only one. And it isn't coming from corporation at Verizon. It's coming under the Federal Zaroga Act, that umbrella. And he's the only one I know.
I'll just ask a final one question, because this was asked of us earlier before we came on the panel. The telephone company, AT&T, had doctors that would be there, or New York Telephone, in your instance, would have doctors in a medical office that would examine you. Did you ever have an experience with them or any of your colleagues, without getting into the details of it? And were they responsive to you to help give you medical guidance, or just simply for their own documentation?
Well, they obviously, their own documentation, whatever the state mandated, Department of Health mandated, they cover their with me, they didn't tell me, they told Albany, New York State Department of Health. But my partner, Mickey Finn, he had a woman doctor that told him, you've been exposed to lead poisoning, but she had a heart. I had this old-time doctor that was just 150% corporate, didn't care about the employees. So, you get your good, bad, and ugly in the world, and I guess I got a bad one, but a friend of mine got a good one. This woman was very compassionate, very concerned about him, and she warned him, so.
Carol, in your, any experience with the company medical office or company medical team that you experienced?
I never ever saw a medical team. We only got through our supervisor information that they would pay for our medicine and that it was mold and we're moving out. That was it.
All right. John, we'll finish up with you.
Yeah, like I said, GE wasn't going to release the medical records, and we had a medical center right on site. And I'm sure they got some stats and statistics about occupational disease, including cancer. I'm wondering now, as I'm listening to everybody, I'm wondering now if that stuff could be obtained through freedom of information, that legally it could be obtained. That would be an interesting. Eddie, get on that, Eddie, wherever you are.
Okay. John, that sounds like an exclamation point to end up this panel. And I want to thank Carol and John. You sat through two sessions in a row. You were great. And Tommy, thank you all. And I'm going to turn it back to Eddie Stone.
Okay.